let's imagine somebody asks you for something. They've asked you, they've made a request of you. Would you bring a dish to share to the meeting tonight? Okay. And the first thing to do is pause. Well, let me have a moment to sense if that will work for me. The power of pausing. Even if you don't say anything, let me have a moment. Just take a breath and ask, how would that be for me to say yes or no to that request?
Hi, and welcome to Beyond Empty Nest. I'm your host, Jody Silverman, speaker, mentor, and Chief Dare Officer at Moms Who Dare. Every Thursday, I'll share stories of midlife transformation, happiness tips, and dare you to see the opportunities waiting for you so that you can make this next chapter even better than the last. If you're ready to dare, I'm ready to dare with you. Let's get into today's episode. Hi, everybody. Would it surprise you to learn that your feelings of overwhelm, and you all know those feelings that I'm talking about, are because of a lack of knowing how to set boundaries? Well, you're not alone if you're surprised by that, because today on Beyond Empty Nest, we have a perfect guest to help you understand why you're feeling overwhelmed as a result of maybe not having clear boundaries. And Weiser Cornell is the CEO of Focusing Resources and the co-developer with Barbara McGavin of Inner Relationship Focusing and Untangling. She learned focusing in 1972 from its developer, Eugene Gendlin, and has taught around the world and online for more than 35 years. She's also written a number of definitive books on focusing, including The Power of Focusing, a practical guide to emotional self-healing, and the radical acceptance of everything. And my first introduction to Anne, 21 Days of Better Boundaries. So Anne, welcome to Beyond Empty Nest.
How nice to be here.
So excited to share you and your expertise with our audience, because I don't know anybody in my own personal life that hasn't experienced problems or struggles or issues with setting boundaries. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about, overcoming the overwhelm and how to know what you need to set calm, clear, compassionate boundaries. And before we do that, I know I read your bio, but is there a story, a backstory that you can share a little bit on how this came to be, like your area of, not to use the pun, focus?
Well, I had the good fortune to meet my teacher, Eugene Janlin, when I was 22 years old. That's 50 years ago now. And I was somebody who so much needed to be able to explore my feelings and look inside. I came from a family background where you were not supposed to notice what you felt.
Mm.
You were supposed to notice what other people were feeling. And it was the unwritten law. This is how everybody behaved. And so when I was 22, I was in the kind of condition that I'd walk into a social situation, a party or a meeting or something like that, and I could tell you how every other person in the room was feeling better than I could tell you how I was feeling. And so when I learned this process that I've been devoted these last many years to teaching myself, to other people myself, I learned this process for myself. It was like the sun went up or the sky opened or so many possibilities. Although the first thing I discovered that I had a lot of feelings that were not very pleasant or comfortable.
Mm.
So that
Yeah.
does sometimes happen when we first become self-aware is, oh, there's so much shame. Oh, there's so much anxiety. Oh, yeah. But I had, at the same time, I was learning a process that enabled me to be with feelings.
Okay.
So it
And
was great.
I've learned not only through my own personal growth journey, but also supporting my children through their struggles, because they have everybody has struggles, is to experience those emotions, good, bad, and ugly, and uncomfortable, I should say. And I think a lot of people have been taught, and we grew up, a lot of people in our audience, the demographic were brought up just like you, that how's everybody else doing and not really paying attention to ourselves. So I love that. Thank you for sharing. I wish I had been exposed to that at 22, and yet I have it now. So it's all good. So what would be, let's kick it off with the first step to healthy boundaries.
The first step to healthy boundaries, the number one first boundary to set is a boundary inside yourself.
Mm.
Because very often we experience feelings, emotions, inner states as too much or flooding. And that is something I can't handle. And therefore, I have to push it away or I have to numb it with different behaviors, like things I eat or activities the number of videos I watch in a row. So our feelings become almost like our adversaries. I have to manage my feelings. I have to push them away. Or they flood in and I let them be too much. And none of that is necessary. So the very first thing I like to teach anybody is a very simple language form. It's like this. I'm sensing something in me feels, and then fill in the blank. So you go from, I'm really upset right now, to, I'm sensing something in me is really upset right now. Or I'm feeling so anxious. Well, I'm sensing something in me is feeling so anxious. And what happens when you shift your language like that is you shift the position of where you're sitting inside yourself. You're no longer that upset or anxious or overwhelmed little being inside yourself. You become bigger. You become the one who can sense that feeling, the one who can turn toward it, the one who can be even curious and compassionate toward that feeling. And it's like night and day.
Yeah, because even when just listening to you say it, and this is the first place you start in the book that I discovered you through this book, because I was Googling about boundary setting and you popped up, and it's the first chapter you start with. And that simple statement, to bring myself to bring to my conscious awareness and say it when I'm feeling a certain emotion. I mean, even listening to you say it, you can feel the separation. It's not that it's not there. It's not that we're ignoring feeling angry, upset, jealous, envious, whatever it may be, disappointed. It's we're putting a little space between us, so it's not defining. When I start to feel, and I used it yesterday and today around something, I'm like, something in me is feeling anxious. And I'm like, I wonder what it is that I was just thinking about before. And when I was able to do it, I'm like, okay, then I was able to figure out how to maybe move forward without the anxiety taking over me. So I'm sensing that something in me feels is the very first place to start when it comes to being able to then set healthy boundaries for yourself.
Right. Because from then on, as you yourself said, you can listen, you can turn toward, you can acknowledge. There are next steps that come. If I'm all anxious, I don't know what to do. I'm just swamped. It's too much. Or if I'm overwhelmed, I just want to blank it out and get away. When I was growing up, and this was in Illinois, the great American Midwest, we had only two ways to be with feelings. You either were taken over by them, which was not preferable,
Mhm.
or you stuffed them. No, I don't feel that way. I'd like to get I'd like to have a nickel for every time my mother said, "I'm not angry."
Yeah.
Well, she obviously was, but she was not aware of it. She was pretending she wasn't. That was her only way to deal with her anger, was to deny that it was there. And when I learned focusing, I learned a third way. And that's what this is. This is, I'm sensing something in me and I'm not pushing it away. I'm not denying it. I'm in a kind of compassionate company with my own feelings. And one of the things that I think is really important is that we start being compassionate toward ourselves.
Right?
We st- yeah.
I mean, how many of you listening out there have ever had a friend or a son or a daughter or anybody come to you upset, angry, and you have the most compassion for them ever, but we don't for ourselves. And that's a whole topic to dive into. Well, part of it is the way we're brought up to put, to put to putting ourselves first and having compassion for ourselves could be a little selfish. And I just had this whole conversation that, selfish, we need to change the definition of it. It's not a bad word. Because in order to show up for others, you must be selfish and take care of yourself. And I use that in a very good way. It's like the oxygen mask, right?
Like the oxygen mask, exactly. And I think we need to define, or we can define selfish as putting yourself as better than others or paying attention to your own needs to the exclusion of all others. And very few people are actually doing that. What they call selfish is none of those things. It's simply that sometimes I give myself some time and some care.
So that leads us to, setting boundaries is a really difficult thing because we get caught up in oh, am I being selfish about this? And I don't want to disappoint somebody. I was sharing a story about how I had my niece really well done, declined an invitation for a family birthday party in such a way that was so in alignment with what you talk about in your book. So I want to talk about, I want to help our audience with, and this is a big topic to get into like 30 minutes, but communicating clear boundaries, because it's not easy. And I love what you say about communicating them, but even more importantly, even learning how you can set boundaries without feeling angry or blaming, make excuses or apologies. Because I'm learning that from your book. I'm learning that, no is a complete sentence.
Well, one of the things I do suggest is that we start by imagining somebody saying no to us.
Mm.
And you just had your niece say no to you so compassionately and kindly that you were delighted. And I want to live in a world where if I make a request of somebody and it doesn't work for them, they will simply say, "Oh, I'd love to, but I'm unable to do that." Because if that doesn't happen, if I can't trust the people around me to say when something I've asked doesn't work, then they've said yes. And then they're either going to resent me and be mad at me, or they're going to flake out and actually not do it
Right.
but not tell me that they're not going to do it. I don't want to live in that world. So when I start realizing how good I feel when people tell me the truth about whether they can say yes or no to something that I've asked them for, I realize, wait a minute, I can also play in the other side of that equation. And I can say that I can tell the truth about what works for me and what doesn't work for me. And first step, of course, is to find out what it is that's true for us.
Mm.
So, this process of getting to know yourself really precedes being able to speak clearly to others. And I do remember so many times in my 20s when people would ask me for things and I'd automatically say yes.
Yeah.
And then a lot of the time I would blow it off. I would But without awareness,
Mm.
I would procrastinate for someone would ask me a favor, "Will you do this sometime?" I would procrastinate forever and I would never do it. And then I would feel guilty and bad about myself and like, what's wrong with me? If I had only noticed. And let me say this, I love the power of pausing. So let's imagine somebody asks you for something. They've asked you, they've made a request of you. Would you bring a dish to share to the meeting tonight? Okay. And the first thing to do is pause. Well, let me have a moment to sense if that will work for me.
There's
And
power.
whether you say it, the power of pausing, even if you don't say anything, let me have a moment. Just take a breath and ask, how would that be for me to say yes or no to that request? And Now that you found out it, okay, I would be glad to. That would actually be fun. I have the time. Say yes. Or, oh my God, another thing to do today before tonight. I'm realizing I just don't have the time. You get to say, you know, thanks for asking. Appreciate that you thought of me for this, but you know what? It's not going to work for me.
Yeah, it's so hard. It's so hard for people to do. It was so hard for me to do. And it's hard before your book. It was hard for me to just say, I loved being invited. Unfortunately, it's not going to work for me this time. And not
Right.
give the reason, not give the reason. And I found
Uh,
myself, because in my world, and I know some of my family listened to my show, and this is nothing wrong. It's just in my world, it was why? Why can't you go, Jody? Why can't you come? Why can't you do that? And I even felt myself contract there. When you're invited, an invitation, or you're asked for something, and you in a really nice way give your answer, and then you're challenged by why is a challenge? Why puts me on the defensive? And I
why always puts people on the defensive? Why is a question that contains a criticism?
Yeah, you know what it is? I never even realized that. And I realized I actually had somebody has shared with me that, well, if they ask you why, you can just smile, give a little giggle, and say, it's just not going to work for me this time. But thank you for that.
That's it. That's it. Just repeat your no with a smile.
Yeah, it's hard. It's because I love how you say take a pause, because that was a big one for me. And I was actually challenged by a family member once. I didn't, not only did I take a pause, I said, you know what? I want to get with Sam. I'm going to get back to you. I
Uh-huh.
just need to check. And the comment was, "What, do you have to have a family meeting?" I said, "Yeah, not the whole family, just with Sam." It's hard. It's
Yes,
hard when
yes.
you haven't been setting boundaries to all of a sudden start to set boundaries. It can feel a little off-putting to the other people receiving them. But I love what you said a little bit ago, where you first have to get clear on what you need, what you desire, what you want, what you don't want for yourself. And
Well,
when
when
you are
people
clear on that, you can set boundaries, right?
exactly, and when people push you, when they make a request, you say no, and then they ask a why question, or they make a snide or sarcastic comment about what you've said, they're now talking about them and not about you anymore.
Mm.
Those are their feelings, and however you respond to that could be with a smile, could be, "I hear this is really important to you. I certainly will think about it." You
Yeah.
know, it's not, but to feel like you have to now make this person happy,
Mm.
that crosses a boundary. No,
That's true.
we
You know
know
what?
that.
It
We
it
don't need
goes to
that.
that whole thing that I learned, early on in my personal growth development, that mostly everything people say and do is usually about them and not about you.
Right.
That's a hard one to swallow when you're younger, but I do want to address one thing, because it's about the setting boundaries without anger, blaming, excuses, or apologies. I never realized what I was doing. I would find myself like, if and my kids could attest to it, because they're the ones that snapped me out of it before your book. I my let's just I'll use my daughter as an example. It's just a fake example, but let's say she called and said, "Mom, I'm going to be around on such and such a day. What do you think we spend the day shopping?" And I would get like, "But I have a podcast to do, and I have this to do, and I would get like a little angry, and she'd like, Mom, you could just say no."
Right. Right. Exactly. Just say no.
So anger is, I didn't realize it's a common reaction to not feeling like we can set boundaries.
Because if you don't feel like you can set boundaries, then for a person to ask you for something feels like an imposition.
Mm.
It feels like it puts you in a spot that is a struggle to deal with. But you don't have to feel that being asked for something is a struggle. You can feel, "Oh, thank you for letting me know what you need. You know what? That isn't going to work for me. Let's do it another time." Or whatever is true. And and blaming is similar. Anger, blaming, like, oh, feeling like the other person having the thought that the other person should have managed their life better so they wouldn't have to ask me for this. And
Ooh,
again, that comes from not being able to sit calmly and just know I have the right to say no to this if it doesn't work for me.
I never
And
thought about that one. That's a big one. And I think that comes with setting having the ability to have boundaries as our generation is facing the aging parents.
yes, yes.
Setting boundaries mixed with the guilt, mixed with the yeah, that you just triggered something in me about that. Like that's a big one. It
Mhm,
really does
mhm.
all come it all comes back to our ability to recognize how we're feeling that up I'm
That's
sensing
right.
something in me is feeling and how
Yeah.
to do that. And then it all comes back to that foundational exercise.
Mhm, mhm.
So if you were to offer any other steps in you know what? No, I'm gonna take that back. I wanna rewind because you talk about setting boundaries as being directly related to your sense of self-worth, yourself feeling worthy. Is am I saying that right?
Absolutely,
Can
absolutely.
you talk a
And
little bit to that?
until I really feel my own worthiness, that I'm as worthy as any other person in the world. I'm as worthy as the person I'm interacting with. They're not worthier than I am. Then until I can feel my worthiness, it's really hard for me to take time for myself, for me to say no to requests that are simply going to be overwhelming and too much for me. I want to really know that I have value. But what often happens is that if we grew up in an environment through no fault of anybody else, we didn't receive the love and care we needed all the time. Kids can internalize that as a sense of, well, it's because there's something wrong with me. It's because we try to make sense of the world as it happens to us. And
Yeah.
so if we got ignored or even abused or something like that, inside it can feel like it's my fault. It's because I'm not good enough. I'm not. And I was carrying that in me when I was 22 and I first began to learn this method of inner awareness. I had to do a lot of inner, I would call it accompaniment. That is, it's like there's a younger one inside us who's feeling unworthy. And then I, the one who can say, I'm sensing something in me feels that way, I'm the one who gives a caring kind of company to that hurt younger self inside. And healing of that does happen. It doesn't happen instantly, but over some weeks and months of continuing to turn toward something that feels unworthy, we can start to feel a shift. That
Mhm.
sense of worthiness begins to grow inside. And everybody has the birthright of feeling worthwhile. It's what we're born with. We had to lose it through encounters that were less than optimal. So you can get back the feeling of worthiness that belongs to you. And then life is so much more fun.
Oh, so much in this. So, all right, we're gonna wrap this up. We're gonna bring it all together because you have a dare for everybody, which it should be really obvious what we're gonna dare you to do, but the foundation of everything is really the dare you're putting out there, right?
That's right.
Why don't we start? Why don't we give everybody their dare and then we'll do a quick little summary here.
That's right. So, everybody, I dare you for the next 24 hours, every time you notice a stressful emotion, upset, anxiety, anger, sadness, overwhelm, every time you notice a stressful emotion, use this language. I am sensing something in me feels, and then name the emotion. And you can follow you can follow that up with, and I'm saying hello to that. So I'm sensing something in me feeling really anxious right now, and I'm saying hello to that. And then just notice what happens. Notice if that makes a difference. That's
Uh,
the dare.
oh, I love that. And we will, in the show notes below, we will have the dare. We also have links on how you can connect with Anne. So it all starts with that dare. It starts with spending at least 24 hours in I'm sensing something in me feels and I'm saying hello to that. And just saying it, I can feel the difference. I can feel the compassion,
Mhm.
the empathy. And from there, you can naturally, it really does naturally come to setting boundaries, saying yes, saying no, taking the pause. So the second thing is pause before giving an answer to something, right? Then you won't end up in regret, in anger, and in shame because you can't or don't want to fulfill it. So take the dare and then practice the pause. Get the book. I'll post a link. And then I do have a fun fact to share with everybody, Anne, because literally a little under a week from when people are listening to this episode, you're joining me live for a live speaker event that we are hosting called Resilient, Confident, and Happy in Midlife. And it's going to be on November 8th. It's a live 3-hour event, and Anne is going to be there live as one of the featured experts to continue our conversation on focus and boundaries and all the good stuff that we need reminders of. The work you're doing is amazing. It has truly impacted my life in such a positive way over these last 6 months since I discovered your book. And I'm grateful to meet you. I'm grateful to share you with the audience. And there will be a link below for you to register for this event so that you can actually come and meet Anne live virtually, but live nonetheless. So, Anne, thank you for being part of Beyond Emptiness, and thank you for agreeing to come back and be part of the Resilient, Confident, and Happy in Midlife Speaker Series.
This is really fun and fulfilling for me. So of course I said yes.
Yeah, and we'll put links to your website because Anne has some great resources that you can take, this work to a different level, deeper level, a greater level, so that you can, bottom line is to just achieve peace and contentment really in your life in a really positive way. So, all right, everybody, you know what I'm about to say. Beyond Empty Nest, our goal is to bring you speakers and experts in fields of all area of mind, body, soul, living, and to have you take one thing away from every episode. Because we have the power. One takeaway is the power to change the whole trajectory of your life in such a positive way. So what was your one thing from this conversation that you took away? Let us know. Leave a comment, leave a review, click the links below, grab a front row seat to the event on November 8th. And as I always say, dare on. Thank you for listening to this episode of Beyond Emptiness. Head over to jodysilverman.com for full show notes, more information, and additional resources. Speaking of additional resources, I've got a great one for you in the show notes below. So if you've enjoyed today's show and are ready to embrace this midlife chapter, then you're going to want to grab our featured resource called the Self-Talk Cleanup Challenge. You may not think so, but to quote our friend Oprah, the one thing I know for sure is that negative self-talk and thoughts are what's keeping you stuck in fear and lacking confidence to take the leaps in midlife that you desire to take. When you grab this resource, you'll receive the exact exercise my first coach took me through. It's simple, yet powerful. In addition, I'll send you a few other tools and tricks to help you knock out the negativity when it shows up, thereby increasing your confidence and your overall happiness, allowing you to have fulfillment and fun in midlife. You deserve it. So go ahead and grab your copy of the Self-Talk Cleanup Challenge, and I'll see you next Thursday. Until then, dare on.